Good evening and welcome to another edition of Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. My co host Larry Dersham and I have a great show for you tonight. There is so much going on, and we have a magnificent guest that's going to join us for the second half. But first, today's headlines. And one story that has unfortunately remained in the headlines all week long is that of beleaguered New York Governor Cuomo. Now, Governor Cuomo was a superstar last summer where I watched his daily press conferences and just with rapt attention because he had all the greatest statistics and all the latest information. Sometimes he was sharing the stage with Dr. Fauci. It was just a pleasure to watch and really learn a lot of that great information. In fact, he was so popular last summer that I remember people were joking he should toss his name into the hat for president. Fast forward almost a year, and things are very, very different. Remember, he suffered a 1-2 punch over the last week. First, it was the nursing home scandal with the underreported numbers, very tragic case, and then followed very closely by the sexual harassment allegations. 3 in total as of today. It's actually under investigation by the New York Attorney General, and Governor Cuomo, for his part, appears to be cooperating. Now, he may have suffered that 1-2 punch, but he's still standing, which is important because there's been lots of talk this week about whether or not the second in command would be ready to ascend to take his shoes, to fill his shoes. Now, it's not going to happen unless, of course, he steps down or is impeached. And right now, it doesn't look like either of those options are going to take place. But one thing I do want to point out is people have been talking about, well, what is the Attorney General doing? Well, there's an independent law firm that has subpoena power and the power to look at documents and really a lot of investigation powers, which is important because even Governor Cuomo agreed that the public has a right to know more. With any sexual harassment investigation, what are investigators look for? They're looking for a pattern of behavior because in many cases, patterns make the predator. Many of the cases that came out in 2017 were characterized by a repeat pattern of behavior. And what they look at in every case, not just Governor Cuomo, but anybody where there's more than one accuser, or sometimes even when there's just one to start with. Remember, Me Too begins with me first in terms of one offender and one victim coming forward first, is they're looking to see whether behavior is unusual or whether behavior is business as usual. In which case, especially if it's post 2017, leaders, politicians, governors, anybody in a position of power should have known better. And for sexual harassment victims, silence is not golden. And of course, there's safety in numbers. One comes forward, others are empowered to do the same. So that's what we're looking at right now in terms of the New York governor. But I do have to say, Larry, one thing that really distinguishes instances and allegations of sexual harassment is it's not a partisan issue. This is never something that is a Democrat issue, a Republican issue, right versus left. It's right versus wrong, and both sides are on the bandwagon here wanting to make sure that justice is done and that we uncover the facts and circumstances that will let us know what should be the fate of the governor criminally, civilly, and politically as we move forward. So while it is true that I did mention, he was getting ready to write that leadership book last summer, and he was sharing the stage with Dr. Fauci. I understand there's a different doctor in the news this week. Who is it, Larry, and what's that all about?
Right, Wendy, it's Dr. Zeus. And Dr. Zeus Enterprises, that's the company that sells his books and publishes his books, will stop selling 6 of his books because they portray people, they say, in ways that are hurtful and wrong. And I would just ask them, show me the victim. Who's been hurt, who's been wrong? But apparently, in this age of political correctness, they made that decision on their own. So anyhow, when I heard that news, my wife told me about it. I made a beeline from my favorite bookstore in La Jolla. And we've got 2 grandchildren now, really tiny toddlers. And I wanted to pick up on some Dr. Zeus books before the book censors and the book burners come to the village and take all those Dr. Zeus books away. So I just thought it
and
was
we're talking about
interesting.
Dr. Seuss, not the Greek god Zeus with a Z.
Well, no, it's really his middle name. Yeah, it's Theodore Zeus Geisel, and he's actually a resident of La Jolla. He's passed away now, but I just wanted to say, just kind of going on a little bit of a rant here regarding what's going on. So basically, this is part of cancel culture, in my opinion. That, by the way, was the theme of CPAC that just closed up last Sunday. So what's really going on, in my opinion, is not only cancel culture, but cancel America. They're trying to erase part of Dr. Seuss's collection of children books. They're trying to erase or revise history with such things as the 1619 Project that has been disproved over and over again, and the Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which the leftists love that because it's filled with misstatements of the true fact of America. They're trying to erase our election integrity forever with H.R. 1, the so-called For the People Act. And I can go into the details on that too. They're trying to erase the difference between girls and boys and religious freedoms under H.R. 5, the so-called Equality Act, which fortunately in the Senate looks like it may not pass. They're trying to tear down our border walls, letting hundreds of thousands of migrants in, some of which are carrying COVID, to go to every part of our land. And by the way, they built, apparently, they don't think border walls work, but why is it around Washington, D.C.? They got a 3-mile long, 7-foot tall fence topped with razor wire. And I say to Speaker Pelosi, tear down this fence. So what
Where have
can
I
we
heard
do?
that before? You know, Larry, one of the interesting things you mentioned in HR 1, and, you know, we've talked a lot this week about voting because obviously the Supreme Court was looking at some of Arizona's voting restrictions and Texas's voting restrictions and other states. And they were basically trying to solve really the dilemma of, can we make sure that we have sufficient restrictions surrounding who can vote, how can they vote, but have those restrictions not impact unnecessarily traditionally disenfranchised groups. That is a tough balance to strike. And you bring up HR 1 and a couple of the other cases that have really been in the news. And, you know, part of the challenge by saying, hey, look, you have to vote at your own precinct, you can't go to a different polling place. You can't just give your ballot to anybody that knocks on your door. Remember, in criminal law, we call that chain of custody. You have to have a chain of custody civilly with voters, too. There's only certain people that can deliver your ballot for you, family member, caregiver, etc. Is there a way in the culture in which we live, and you've laid out some of the issues that are in the news right now, where we can preserve election integrity while still ensuring that none of the restrictions are applied, certainly not designed to disenfranchise one group over another?
I think we can if we really put our hearts to it, Wendy. But what is so sad to me is this is not a bipartisan effort. It's totally a Democratic effort. And even my own representative, where I live in San Diego County, voted for this and actually was part of drafting it. What HR 1 will do, first of all, it does not address the voting machines problem. And I'm not going to name a particular vendor. There are multiple vendors of voting machines that have a lot of problems with it. But this HR 1 that's already passed the House, it's now going to the Senate, nationwide mail-in voting, nationwide ballot harvesting. We were just talking about knocking on the door. That's ballot harvesting. That's right. Bans voter ID. Why would you ever ban voter ID? You need ID for getting on planes, buying alcohol, on and on. Nationwide motor voter registration. It mandates early voting. How about same-day voting?
Yeah,
nationwide same-day registration. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember, Larry, when you and I were growing up, how different those rules were, and you know how it was such a privilege and a right to vote, and how everybody really held that sacred, and nobody batted an eye about having to prove who you were before you had to cast a vote. And you know, that ID, you know, I have to make the joke, pretty soon we're going to have to show a vaccine passport to vote, because you're going to need that for everything else. But I just wanted to sort of draw the distinction there. You know, on the one hand, we're really relaxing the rules regarding who can vote. I mean, lots of states are reinstating convicted felons' right to vote. They're looking at, what kind of citizenship status or lack thereof. They're really kind of going out on a limb and expanding all the categories. And, different states are coming to different decisions on that. But on the other hand, Larry, we seem to be going off the deep end in terms of needing to show you've been vaccinated to do so many other things. Now, we're not there yet, right? We're still just talking. But some of that talk has people a little upset. How can we go so far in terms of loosening restrictions on something as precious and as important as right to vote, but then go the other direction as to how our freedom to associate may be contingent on whether we're willing to vaccinate?
Right. I would say this, Wendy. We need to, I think, tighten restrictions on voting. Make it a one-day event, just like it was when our parents were doing their voting. And also going to the vaccination. A lot of times they'll put out these trial balloons. They'll try them in certain countries and see if they fly, and then they'll spread it to other countries. And just check this out. I heard this from an
You
Israeli
got you got
person
you got less
today
than
on a
20
special
seconds,
newsletter.
Larry.
Yeah, it's called the green passport. Very dangerous. Everybody has to have a vaccination to fly in or out of the country. Very scary.
Oh, it was a good job summing it up. All right, we need to take a short commercial break, but don't touch that dial, folks, because when we return, you're going to meet one of the greatest civil rights leaders in the United States. And we'll get our thoughts on how Americans can heal the racial divide. Please stay with us. You're going to be glad you did. This is Today with Dr. Wendy, and we'll be back in a flash. Welcome back to Today with Dr. Wendy. I'm Wendy Patrick. Who can ever forget the great quote from Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. from his 1963 I Have a Dream speech delivered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., where he said, "I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character." Larry, I understand we have a guest tonight that knows firsthand a lot about that topic. Who do we have the privilege of welcoming to the show?
Right, Winnie. She was the daughter of the late civil rights activist, Reverend A.D. King, and his wife, Naomi Barber King. Alveda grew up in the civil rights movement led by her uncle, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Her family home in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed, as was her father's church office in Louisville, Kentucky. Alveda was even jailed during the open housing movement. She sees now, though, the pro-life movement as a continuation of the civil rights struggle. She's founder, a former college professor, and she served in the Georgia State House of Representatives. She currently serves on the pastoral team of Priests for Life as executive director of its outreach, which is called Civil Rights for the Unborn. She's also a presidential appointee, spiritual advisor for the Trump National Diversity Coalition. She's an actress, a singer, a songwriter, a blogger, and guardian of the King family legacy. And she's also the author of numerous books, so many I can't name them all, but one of my favorites is called We're Not Colorblind. She's also an executive producer of a soon-to-be released movie, Roe v. Wade. Can't wait to see that one. Welcome to the show, Alveda.
Well, hi, Larry. And to all your listeners and viewers, if they're online.
Alveda,
Thanks.
I've listened to a lot of your material, and one of the things that really characterizes every appearance you make is your positivity and your graciousness. You're always welcoming everyone, and I wonder if that stems in part from the fact that you grew up in a very big family where you actually did have to get along with everyone. And I understand your mom moved in with you recently, and I think that's just a blessing. It's so wonderful having family around. But I always wondered, Alveda, what was the most fun part, the best part about growing up in the King family? What would you say you remember the most?
We always went to each other's homes, in and out of everybody's home, and even when we lived in different cities, we managed to visit, and that was fun. On the holidays, our one in particular, my dad was nearby, and my uncle was in California. He really was playing the piano, the women, the ladies, the children were singing, and all that. So, family time was very, very important. My dad worked in we came out when we
Well, Alveda, I often thought America has made great strides in racial harmony since your uncle gave his famous speech there at the Lincoln Memorial and everything else he did, the amazing marches, the multiple amazing speeches. But it seems lately that we're going in the opposite direction. I was so hopeful that race relations are getting better and better, but now all of a sudden, the last couple of years, it seems like we're going in the opposite direction. Why do you think this is happening?
We have to speak power from speak and talk to each other about the culturally engineered concept of race. And that's where racism comes from, and the separate races. Now, the Bible is taught one blood is like all people. So we are therefore human beings. And when you have science that shows that there's no separate races, the DNA and the human will make us one race. Now, Martin Luther mistaken, and that's the power of transparency. People do not know transparency is about those who survive in America. Mark Luther wants to bring forth cleansing of all the evidence of human races and that's I say that because of the U.S. out there and all that. So that's part of the ultimate example. Make my one and I won't get into the fact of the Bible. I have to see all the
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hear
you
that
know,
there's a
go ahead,
great
Larry.
quote, just briefly, Uncle, do you call him Uncle ML, I think, possibly? Yeah, it says, we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. I love that statement. And sisters, you got it.
You know, Alvito,
Absolutely.
one of the most inspirational parts of your books and your upcoming movies and your songs and your music is really it does have that spirit of unity, and there is nobody that ever comes across anything you say, do, reenact that isn't just overcome by your love for fellow man. It's so inspiring and encouraging to everyone else. And I just wonder as we move forward, how can we use that positive momentum as really a driving force to counteract those that see the world in terms of racially divided?
It seems, in my opinion, after reading so much literature on it, that the left, and I'll just say it, the socialists and even the communists have seemed to have infiltrated our politics, and they seem to be using, in many cases, race as a dividing tool to divide us up. And that's what worries me so much. In fact, I won't mention the name of this group, but everybody would know it if I did, that they, even on their own website, in their own interviews, say that they're trained Marxists. And they're using this racial division to kind of divide us up, and I guess eventually to take us over. I don't know what their ultimate plan is, but it's very worrisome. But I think, do you think that the Christians, and if we turn back to God, we can overcome this division and just kind of see through it?
Mm.
And I do that for my family and friends and all of the communities that I'm living with.
You know, I heard you talk about that on a talk show not long ago about your new Fox Nation show and the cooking show. And I just wonder, do you have a favorite dish that you like to make? I know everybody likes to eat, so we love to hear about new recipes. And if so, what is it?
Uh, that's
Well,
great. Could you tell us a little bit about this movie that you're working on? You're the executive producer, right, Alvita?
yeah, no, you know what? That I'm so glad you teased that up. The movie. We're going to talk more about that, but we're at the end of the time. I just want to say how privileged Larry and I are to have you on the show today. Thank you, Alvita, so
Yes.
much for joining us. It's just been a pleasure. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Alvita.
And thank you to our listeners. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. Take care this week. We're going to have a wonderful show again for you next weekend. So please join us next week for more of Today with Dr. Wendy, headlines with a silver lining. Have a great week and God bless you.